The Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett featuring Professor Tim Spector. 99 minutes flossing your teeth can cut your risk of dementia nearly in half. That single stat from Professor Tim Spector, one of the world's top 100 most cited scientists, captures something that would have sounded absurd 5 years ago, but now sits at the center of a revolution in how we understand the brain. The connection between your mouth, your gut, and your mental health is so direct that Spector believes we have been going down the wrong path in psychiatry for 40 years. 3 things from this conversation will change how you think about your brain, your diet, and whether depression is really a chemical imbalance. Section 1. The 40-year mistake in psychiatry. Tim Spector drops a quiet bombshell early in this conversation. For 4 decades, medicine has treated depression as a simple chemical imbalance, a serotonin problem fixed by Prozac. Spector argues the emerging science tells a completely different story. Depression, he says, is increasingly looking like an immune system problem, an inflammatory response that the brain misinterprets as a threat. The evidence came partly from his own research during COVID. When Zoe tracked 1 million people's responses to the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines, they found people experienced genuine depression for about 24 hours following vaccination. Not sadness. Clinical depression symptoms triggered by a brief immune response. As Spector puts it, you can trigger depression through a little shift in your immune system. The growing theory is that people with long-term depression have their immune system stuck in an on position, getting the equivalent of constant tickling by a vaccine. This reframes everything. If depression is fundamentally an inflammatory condition rather than a neurotransmitter deficit, then the food you eat, the state of your gut microbiome, and your overall inflammation levels become frontline treatments, not afterthoughts. And yet, as Spector notes with visible frustration, nearly no one in clinical practice is connecting these dots. Section 2. Parkinson's disease starts in your gut. Perhaps the most startling claim in the entire conversation is that Parkinson's disease appears to begin in the gut, roughly a decade before it ever shows symptoms in the brain. Spector explains that epidemiological data now shows about 90% of people who eventually develop Parkinson's had gut problems 10 years before diagnosis. Constipation, bloating, a sluggish intestine. The mechanism is chilling. A protein called alpha-synuclein misfolds in the gut, and researchers believe these misfolded proteins slowly travel up the vagus nerve, the longest nerve in the body, over approximately 10 years before reaching the brain and causing the characteristic damage. The same protein tangles found in Parkinson's brains have been identified in the guts of these patients years before neurological symptoms appear. The implication is enormous. If Parkinson's starts with gut inflammation, then a gut-friendly diet might actually prevent one of the most devastating neurological diseases. And Spector doesn't stop there. He asks what other brain diseases might have the same origin: multiple sclerosis, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. Type 2 diabetes alone makes you 4 times more likely to develop a brain disease of any kind. The brain, he insists, is just another organ responding to signals from the rest of the body. Section 3. The 8 rules for gut health. Spector has distilled his research into 8 practical rules that he says work for brain health just as much as gut health, because the two are inseparable. First, be mindful of what you eat. Stop and think before putting food in your mouth. Second, and this is the cornerstone, eat 30 different plants a week. These provide the chemical diversity that feeds thousands of different microbial species in your gut. Each species is highly specialized. There's one bug called Lawsonibacter that literally only eats coffee. When you drink coffee, it has a party, has sex, has babies, multiplies, and produces chemicals that may explain why coffee reduces heart disease risk by 25%. Third, eat 3 portions of fermented foods daily. A Stanford study of 28 people showed that 5 portions a day for a month reduced blood inflammation by 25% compared to a fiber diet. Yogurt, real cheese, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, and kombucha all count. Even pasteurized fermented foods, which Spector used to dismiss, appear to provide benefits through dead microbes tickling the immune system. Fourth, pivot your protein away from eggs and meat toward beans, legumes, mushrooms, and whole grains, which also deliver the fiber your gut microbes desperately need. Fifth, think quality, not calories. Calorie-restricted diets fail for the vast majority of people because they drive up hunger signals, which is the main driver of obesity. Sixth, avoid high-risk ultra-processed foods. The emulsifiers, preservatives, and artificial sweeteners in these products damage gut microbes that have never encountered these synthetic chemicals in their billions of years of evolution. Seventh, eat as many natural colors as possible, because bright berries, purple cabbages, and colorful vegetables contain polyphenols that fuel gut microbes. Eighth, give your gut a rest with 12 to 14 hours of overnight fasting, though Spector acknowledges a third of people in their 100,000-person study simply could not tolerate it. Section 4. The zero-fat lie and why 30% of people think they are gluten-intolerant. Spector holds up a piece of standard supermarket white bread and delivers a devastating takedown. This is a high-risk food, he says, designed so you barely need to chew it. It's baby food for adults. Studies show ultra-processed bread makes people overeat by 25%. The preservatives mean it will look the same in a week. The emulsifiers hold it together. The sugar and salt make it irresistible. When Stephen mentions his zero-fat Greek yogurt, Spector is blunt. If it says zero fat, it's a sign it's unhealthy. Companies replace fat with starchy fillers and sugar. The USDA has now reversed decades of low-fat guidance and acknowledged that fat is actually good for you. Then there's gluten. Roughly 30% of people believe gluten is a problem for them, but only 1% actually need to avoid it. The real culprit is the constellation of additives, emulsifiers, colorants, and cheap ingredients in processed sandwiches. When people give up sandwiches and feel better, they credit gluten avoidance when the improvement likely comes from dodging the dozens of other synthetic ingredients. Section 5. The keto curiosity and brain energy in a significant shift from his previous stance. Spector admits he has become keto curious. The turning point was learning that the ketogenic diet remains the primary treatment for drug-resistant childhood epilepsy. The mechanism is essentially rebooting the brain by switching its energy supply from glucose to ketone bodies. Stephen Bartlett adds compelling personal testimony. When he's in ketosis, the food noise vanishes. Cravings for junk food disappear. He describes the cognitive clarity as feeling like everything is in high definition, like his mouth and brain are suddenly connected. Joe Rogan has described the same phenomenon, saying his ability to articulate himself during 4-hour podcasts improves so dramatically on keto that he would stay in it forever. But Spector adds important caution. Long-term keto is incompatible with keeping your gut healthy. The science for keto improving conditions beyond epilepsy remains anecdotal, with studies of just 7 patients and no proper control groups. His proposed middle ground is intermittent keto, perhaps a few days every 3 to 6 months, combined with gut protective measures. He plans to test this on himself later in the year. Section 6. Microplastics in your brain and the GLP-1 revolution. When Spector got his brain scanned at a specialized London clinic, he discovered he is in the highest 20% for environmental microplastics in his blood. The smaller particles came from decades of cycling around London, inhaled through his lungs. He has added a water filter and avoids plastic containers, but admits the science on how harmful microplastics truly are remains unresolved. On GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic, Spector is cautiously optimistic, but raises 2 serious concerns. First, most people taking them receive zero dietary education. The drugs suppress hunger, creating a perfect window to rebuild eating habits, but virtually nobody is getting that lifestyle advice alongside the prescription. Second, and more provocatively, early data suggests GLP-1 drugs reduce gambling, addiction, and risk-taking behavior. If the drug dampens fundamental human drives, Spector asks, could it make you less effective as an entrepreneur? Could it subtly change who you are as a person? The long-term brain effects remain unknown, though current data suggests the drugs may actually be brain protective and reduce dementia risk. Section 7. The mood connection nobody told you about. Across 4 separate Zoe studies, the same pattern emerged. When people improved their diet, the very first thing they noticed, before any blood changes, before any measurable gut improvements, was that their mood and energy improved. People on terrible diets of chicken nuggets, pot noodles, and chocolate bars were napping all day, exhausted constantly, and had no idea their food was responsible. Spector explains the vicious cycle. A bad night's sleep makes your brain crave sugary junk as a quick fix. The junk food triggers inflammation. The inflammation sends signals to your brain that something is wrong. Your brain shifts into stress mode, which changes your behavior, making you tired, irritable, and more likely to reach for another chocolate bar. It's not willpower failure. It's a physiological feedback loop driven by your immune system. The conversation circles back to a profound insight about stress itself. What we experience as psychological stress is actually a physiological event that directly affects the immune system, which then sends signals to the brain to change behavior. Early childhood trauma can permanently raise inflammatory markers in the blood. Talk therapy has been shown to reduce inflammation. Everything, Spector argues, from depression to chronic pain to ADHD, is connected through this inflammatory pathway that we spent decades ignoring. Key takeaways: flossing reduces dementia risk by nearly 50% because oral bacteria can migrate to the brain and trigger inflammation. Parkinson's disease likely starts in the gut a decade before brain symptoms appear. Eat 30 different plants a week, 3 portions of fermented food daily, and give your gut a 12 to 14-hour overnight fast. Zero-fat products are a trap. Only 1% of people are truly gluten intolerant. Ultra-processed food makes you overeat by 25%. GLP-1 drugs could transform public health but need to be paired with dietary education, and their long-term effects on personality and drive remain unknown. Your mood is the first thing to respond to dietary changes, often before any measurable biological shifts. Intermittent keto may offer cognitive benefits without destroying your gut microbiome. Depression is increasingly understood as an inflammatory condition, not simply a chemical imbalance.